All right.
Okay, welcome everybody. I'm Leslie Nips. It's April 27th, 4 p.m. Pacific time, and we are gathered for the webinar, the Constellation Taster, starring the faculty of the upcoming West Coast Constellations Intensive, this May 30th to June 3rd in Northern California, here in the USA, with JoAnne, Chartrand, Dyrian, Benz, and Sara Peyton, and myself. Welcome, everybody. We're going to keep welcoming people. I wouldn't be surprised if we end up with even 50 people in this call, so they'll just keep coming. I want to just say a couple of words about Zoom for y'all. Just two small things. One, for those of you new to Zoom, in the upper right-hand corner, you will notice a little toggle, which can go back and forth between speaker view and gallery view. Gallery view allows you to see everybody. Speaker view allows you to have the main speaker, who right now is me, biggest on your screen. So gallery view is nice to see everybody, and then speaker view is nice if someone's speaking for a while and you get to see their face really big, particularly a faculty member. The other thing I turn your attention to, since we're a large group and I suspect we are going to get larger, is the chat function, which is at the lower part of your screen for most of you. Sometimes on tablets or phones, it's in a slightly different place, so you'll have to hunt for it. But if you just move your cursor, it will appear the bottom of your screen. You can click on that, and I really encourage you to do that, to post questions as we go along. It really isn't going to be possible to kind of raise your hand and like in a normal class, but if you post a nice short question for any of the teachers, you can do that right now if you're like already got one bursting. We will get to them in order, and hopefully get to all of them. We'll see what happens. But that's a great way to communicate. Right now, what I invite you to do, if you would like to, for those of you who are on your computer or your tablet, is just type on, your connection to constellations and where you are. Yeah, that kind of gives us a feel. We're constellations people, we're systemics people. We like the feeling of who are we. So if you just type in a little bit who you are and where you're from, then that actually gives us a sense of who we are a bit. So we have someone from Melbourne, that's great. I'll quote some of them as we go along. So full disclosure to start out before I turn this over to our faculty is that, as you already know, these are the faculty of the West Coast Constellations Intensive coming up. We have Canadians. We have someone who took a workshop from Sara. Some people from Maine. That's great. We're offering up this webinar right now in order to share with you what the faculty have to offer, give you a rich experience today, and also promote the upcoming intensive. And a special discount we're going to be giving to people in this webinar and your friends. So you'll be able to stick around for news about that as we share towards the end a little bit more about the event and the discount we would like to offer to everyone on this call. So stay tuned for that. But for now, what I would like to do is introduce the faculty. I'm going to start out with JoAnne. JoAnne, would you just say a couple words about who you are, your background, your interest in constellations, maybe a cool thing about you that has nothing to do with constellations? Just say a few words about yourself so the group who doesn't know you can get to know you a bit better.
All right. So my name is JoAnne, and I'm a somatic psychology educator and also a somatic experiencing practitioner. So my specialty is working with trauma. And I have been in private practice for 40 years, working with as a somatic psychology educator, doing transpersonal work with the IFS in many different modalities. And I have been a family constellation facilitator and trainer, facilitator since for 20 years. And we actually call our work relational constellations.
Beautiful.
And let's see, my training and background is mostly from the time when I lived in Amsterdam for the 17 years I was there.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's your little tidbit she didn't know.
There you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm a gardener. I love to play in the garden. Mm-hmm.
That's a good thing to do in Santa Barbara.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Invite new people as you arrive. I just invite you to mute yourselves. Thank you very much. Dyrian, would you be willing to introduce yourself, please?
Yes. I have been a husband and a family constellation facilitator for well over 20 years, both of those things equally close. And my background is mostly in psychology, teaching at the university on the graduate level and doing training as a Hakomi trainer. I used to travel all over and teach those trainings. And I love writing. But even more so, I love poetry. That's my passion.
And JoAnne and Dyrian are quite famous in these circles because you two were kind of the training deal in Northern and Central California for a good long time, weren't you?
Yeah, for a good 10 years.
Yeah, we brought Bert Hellinger over for a few years and
5 times. And a lot of the second generation German trainers who all learned from Bert Hellinger. Yeah.
And you know, a secret is that probably I connected with Bert first because of our love of poetry.
Yeah.
Then we got into the constellations. Mm-hmm. So that was really sweet.
It's very sweet. Oh,
it is.
That's really lovely. Yeah, that's really nice. And we honor and bow to the fact that Santa Barbara's had a rough year.
Thank you.
Yes, very rough.
Yeah. So thank you for being here. It's really grand to have you. I run into your students all the time up here in the Bay Area. It's a very regular thing. And I know there are a bunch of Dyrian and JoAnne fans here on the call. For now, let me turn it over to Sara Peyton. Would you introduce yourself?
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie. My name is Sara Peyton, and here it's backwards. I wrote a book just it took me a long time to write the book, but it just came out in September. And my love and passion is how does language come together with healing trauma? And then when we add constellation work to that, how does that synergy create sustained long-term emotional well-being and healing and self-connection? How does it make brains yummy and delicious places to live instead of self-lacerating homes of Edward Scissorhands? That is my passion and desire, is to just get the information about the neuroscience of self-criticism into the world as far as possible so that we can be kinder to ourselves and kinder to our planet. So that is where I come from. My most beloved and major teachers have been Jane Peterson and Elena Veselago, and I got to study for a year also with Mark Johnson and Blaze in Seattle, Washington as well. And then I speak every year at the ISCA intensive in Europe. I'm a regular featured speaker there and have been for the last 5 years, and get to teach a little bit there as well with the way that we can bring neuroscience into constellations and begin to represent different parts of our brain when we're working, and how that then supports deep, deep self-compassion.
I love watching Sara work, not only because she's kind of a fabulous workshop leader, but she really does stretch in a good way the ways in which constellations can be used. You know, we're kind of used to seeing grandma and grandpa, and if we're going really crazy, we'll bring in Poland or something like that. But she brings in elements of the brain in a way it's fun, it's effective, and something I recommend to all of you to experience sometime if you're able to.
And I have heard just glowing reports from people who have done similar work with JoAnne and Dyrian.
Yes.
So for folks who are interested in this is just a spectacular faculty for people who are interested in the emergence of knowledge and an understanding of our embodied beings in constellation work.
Yes, I agree, 100%. Some of the trauma stars are going to be at this event.
And it's nice that all three of us have that in common, and we all have different flavors.
Exactly.
Which is really quite special.
Exactly. And then just introduce myself just a little bit.
Four of us.
I'm on the West Coast in Oakland, California. I love living in Oakland, California. Want to say I'm a real booster of the Bay Area and of Oakland. I've been a practitioner, constellations practitioner for about 10 years. Been training for a few years. I am very much the junior member of this crowd, and yet one of my passions is organizing. I really, really like bringing brilliant people together to make amazing constellation spaces where everyone can kind of shine and have fun and feel like there's just more and more for everybody to participate in, whether they're on staff or faculty or they're participants, and just create environments of both playfulness and reverence and a bit of courage and fun. And so this is our second year with the West Coast Constellations Intensive. I organized the 2015 North American Systemic Constellations Conference in San Diego, for any of you who attended that event. And I consider it an honor to be able to bring amazing people together and just create spaces for them to be amazing together, and really support each other. So that's why I'm hosting this, so that hopefully this will be a little taste of that kind of an experience. So
we'd like to vouch for you also, Leslie, because you've been a phenomenal organizer for all the different setups that you've done. And the variety of constellation work you do is also quite brilliant. So we're excited about team teaching together.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens.
Good team.
Yeah. So what we're going to do in the rest of this call is there's going to be opportunities for questions. I'm going to take a look at the chat in just a moment to see if anyone's already asked a question, and put it out there. So sort of a little back and forth. We're also going to have some exercises by a couple of us, not me, a couple of the others, lead us in actual constellation work. So we can have a constellation experience together, and there'll be an opportunity to do some sharing or asking some questions about those experiences. And then at the end, I'm going to spend a little bit time talking more about the intensive, so that for those of you who haven't heard about it, or maybe you're on the fence about it, will have the information you need to either think about coming or share it with people you think might be a good fit, which is another option. But for now, while I look at the chat just a little bit, I'm going to turn this over to Dyrian, who's going to lead us in a little bit of an exercise. And let me turn it over to you, Dyrian. You tell us what we're up to now.
Okay. One of the things I've been doing lately is editing our latest book called Healing Love Trauma, and with constellations. And just being immersed in that kind of area, how our love capacity, both in giving and taking, can be influenced by traumatic or disturbing events in childhood. I've also noticed how we all have a wounded or hurt child inside. There is no one who has not had a suffering child. And that's true for me, for my parents, for my grandparents. So I just like to offer this little imagery exercise of just imagining yourself as a young child, perhaps 4, 5, or 6 years old, and perhaps at a time that was difficult. Just see yourself. And then simply look and smile at yourself with kindness and compassion, just looking at your inner child with sweetness. And then let that image fade and choose either your mother or your father. Imagine them when they were about 4 or 5 or 6. Again, perhaps at a difficult time. We all, as children, have had our pain in our own individual way. So just see them, mother or father, and smile at them, at the small child that they once were. Just friendly, compassionate smile. And then to complete, just for yourself sitting there right now listening, have a smile. Look at yourself with that compassion, that kindness, just smiling at yourself as you are, and all those who came before you who probably carried all those hurts also, and letting it stop with us, smiling at yourself kindly. And then let yourself come back here, come to your body, have a sense of yourself sitting there, feeling your body, yourself, and then open your eyes and come back. It's just been amazing to me as I've been investigating or writing and investigating this love trauma topic, how we all have our own hurt and carry it forward in life. And we would love to offer a way to put a remedy, kindness to that. Okay.
Thank you, Dyrian. I have to say, as a nature constellations person, I really appreciate the timing of the crows.
Yeah.
We can hear them very well.
Oh, great.
Really quite nice.
Mhm.
Sort of agreeing with you. And also thank you, just personally, I had a very nice picture of my mother at that age, which was sweet. Really, really appreciate that. If anyone has any questions or shares about that, please go ahead. Put that in the chat. It can be just short, something nice you got from it, or something that was sticky, or a question you might have following it. A question arises for me, Dyrian, which is, I'm wondering, I'm sure you can imagine that for some people, smiling at their parent, even if the parent is young,
Yeah.
might feel challenging. What might you recommend for them for working further with this sweet little exercise?
To make a greater distance, to put them further away. So put them as far away as needed that you can comfortably give it even the tiniest hint of a smile.
And to find the optimal distance and use the breath to do that.
Oh, say more about that. Use the breath to do that. What does that mean?
Well, being in touch with the breath as you do it, and as you place yourself in a different location, the breath will shift, and that will inform where the right optimal distance is.
And it will regulate the nervous system, down-regulate the nervous system from any overactivation. So distance is always a good way to go when something is too much.
And a good thing for all, I know there's a number of facilitators or budding facilitators here in this call that, doing that physically with actual representatives is also a good thing to remember. And it's getting to,
Yes.
Sarah, I could tell you had a thought upon that, yes?
I was just so struck by smiling at the little ones that my parents were. Had a real sweetness for me. That was unexpected, quite sudden.
Oh, that's nice. Thanks. Yeah, after a while it turned like that for me also.
It's nice to hear you say after a while. It's nice to acknowledge the journey.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Smiling at our parents, as you know, is often the hardest thing for most of us at any level or stage.
Yeah.
What I really like about it, though, is that it kind of chunks the whole thing down. We're not saying embrace, forgive. It's just a nice small chunk, smile. Just, it sort of lowers a lot. There's often a lot of pressure in our culture to have a certain kind of
forgive
thing with our parents. So,
yeah.
Nice.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Did anyone have a share? I'd be willing to take someone off of mute if you raise your hand and I happen to see it. I think Shay at NVC Melbourne. Did you have your hand up?
Actually, yeah, I saw my mother at age 6 when her father died, and it brought me to tears.
Yes.
So sweet. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Somebody else. And again, forgive me if it takes me a second to see your hand. And I know some of you have your picture muted. Does anyone else want to do it? Sometimes the sharing really deepens it for all of us.
We got a share here from Roxanne.
Yeah, Roxanne.
Yes.
And then I see you here, Asuke.
Roxanne wrote, I came to a new realization even though the circumstances were different.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
The circumstances for my mother and myself in terms of birth order, for example, were quite different. But what I realized is that her wounding was very similar to my wounding. I had never realized that before.
Wow.
That's big.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's not apparent from just looking.
Right.
So this is very, very helpful for me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that can soften up the whole ancestral soul. Really goes beyond us. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I will unmute Hirosuke if I'm saying your name correctly. I hope so.
Hi, I go with my last name Honda because that's easier. And thank you for the opportunity. And to me, it's more like a imaginary images of my parents because I haven't seen them when they were little, through pictures and so forth. But instead of me, am I doing this correctly or not? Just creating an image of my parents being little was touching, really. So.
Yeah, even having a sense of their presence when they were little children, even if you're not a visual person, that's good enough. It's really for our own heart that we do it in the end. So yeah, anything.
Thank you so much, Honda. Thank you. And my image, for what it was worth, was my mother. I've always known that she was a missionary kid, and the day they left China was very painful for them. So I just saw an image of her on that day and the heartbreak of that leave taking.
Wow.
Very sweet.
Yeah.
Anyone else? I'm just going to go to the other page because there's enough of you that there are 2 pages of you now.
Wow.
So I have to kind of scroll through all of you to find if anyone has their hand up. Okay. Well, at this point, what I would like to do is shift it over to Sara. Sara, I am noticing there is a question for you. I don't know if you want to answer the question now before you do an exercise, or
I'll come back to it.
Oh, come back to it. Okay,
Yeah.
good. Okay.
Yeah. So this exploration with Dyrian brings me to an invitation to all of us to do a little bit of constellation work, as we just got to do with Dyrian, with Dyrian's invitation, but to add a brain part. And to add the brain part, I'll just tell you what the brain part is that we are adding. And that is, we're going to add the left hemisphere to our sense of our own internal world. And in order to do this, what I'd like you to know about the left hemisphere is that it is not a relational place. The left hemisphere has a different structure than the right hemisphere. And the left hemisphere is not directly connected to the internal sense of having a body and of having emotions. It has to get all of that all that stuff has to come up and come through and come over and be turned into words and mulled over. And so the left hemisphere doesn't know how to have a sense of compassion. It knows how to judge. It knows how to analyze. It knows how to criticize. It's especially good at blaming. It's very, very good at blaming. So it's in opposition in some ways and supported by, but in this particular case, I'm going to do an opposition. The left hemisphere, criticism, blame, analysis, what has gone wrong? Who is at fault? Who is responsible? And the right hemisphere, able to see the big picture, able to hold everything, a capacity for a sense of deep context, of history, of family experience, of personal experience. All that is swimming in this gorgeous sort of sea that gets organized by warmth and relationship. So what I'd like you to do is we're going to take off a little bit on what Dyrian was offering, but I'd like you to imagine yourself in a big ballroom, big empty ballroom, with yourself as the seer at one end, and yourself, just kind of the self that's doing its best to live through the world at the other end. And notice how your relationship is with your own self at the other end of this empty room. And see what happens in your body. And especially pay attention to whether or not you have a sense of really liking yourself. Whether there is a sense of warmth, acknowledgement, like, yeah, I see that this person is doing the best they can, and boy, are they working hard, and I love the way that they find their way through this world. And just notice if instead of all of that warmth and yumminess, instead there might be like any kind of judgment, any kind of like hopelessness or exhaustion or fatigue or despair. Just notice any edge of that you have in looking at your own self there. And notice how that is in your body. And now I'm going to have you place your left hemisphere outside of yourself. Let yourself have your left hemisphere. Very good at analyzing, assigning responsibility, blaming, finding fault, measuring. Let that part of you be there. And let it look at you standing there doing the best you can. It may cross its arms as it's standing there looking at you doing the best that you can. There may be a lot of judgment. Let that be. And let yourself encircle even your left hemisphere with warmth. Go, oh, left hemisphere, of course you are judging us. That is your job. Thank you for working so hard. And see what it's like to let that part of yourself be outside yourself and not the whole of you. And now bring behind you someone who loves you. Could be a person, or if there's not really a good trust relationship with humans, it could be a companion animal that comes and leans against your legs, or it could be a particular tree from your childhood that you have a sense of deeply loving you. Or it could be a beloved parent or grandparent, or it could be your best friend. And see how it is to have them peer over your shoulder at the you who is working so hard. See how it is to have your left hemisphere be outside yourself and acknowledged and loved for how hard it's trying, instead of it having to be everything. And now, letting yourself come back. Let go of this empty room with these few figures in it, and come back to us here now together in this circle where we are. Thank you. And I'd love to know how that was for anybody who would be willing to share.
I'd like to say something.
Oh yeah, JoAnne, let's hear you.
I found it tenderizing towards the left brain. And at first, when the left brain, I put it out there, I felt this contraction in my belly center, and my breath shortened. And as I stayed with it more, and I brought in a healthy ancestor, a particular one that I feel is my soul companion, like a soul companion guide, everything started softening, and my belly center started expanding, and I felt like this kind of tenderizing quality, waves of tenderization occurring over my whole body.
Thank you, JoAnne. Sweet to hear. And Zane Mare wrote, thank you, that was helpful.
You're unmuted, Zane. Except we're still not hearing you, unfortunately.
I just caught a little sound.
Hang on a minute.
There you are.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. People may need to turn their volumes up just a little.
No, thank you. That was beautiful. So.
Thank you, Zane. Anything else you want to say there?
No, at this stage, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming in. And Honda said, Honda, go ahead. We'll unmute you and let us hear your voice.
Okay. Hi, Sara. Thank you so much for another great experience in a very short, compacted way. I still struggle even after taking your workshop. I'm working on it. But bringing my loved ones, as you know, my struggle has been with my 3-year-old son. So I put him behind me and then see how he may see my struggles. And that was very touching. He seems way more accepting and loving than me being critical to what I'm doing. So thank you.
Our little ones teach us, don't they?
A lot.
Yeah. And Roxanne wrote, let's see, let's get Honda muted because that's where the echo's coming through. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, and maybe we could get Roxanne off mute for this question.
There she goes. She's got it.
Okay.
Yes, hello. I was a little confused about the supportive other. Is that person coming behind me as the observer, or behind myself as the
coming behind you as the observer to help you see with different eyes. was my intention. But
Oh.
maybe it's very sweet to have that one come behind the you that is working so hard in the world. Maybe that's more important.
Thank you. I was playing with that person behind both.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Fascinating exercise. Thank you.
Thank you, Roxanne. And then there was this question from Sajid. Does Sara's work with the brain also integrate with the ancestral aspects of constellation work? And it absolutely does. I was working with someone who had a sense that their nervous system was so burdened. This was a fellow a couple of months ago who had a sense that his nervous system was almost frayed to nothingness. It was just shreds of fiber left. And there was so much exhaustion. And one of the things when we sat down to do a constellation was, and we had his nervous system there, and we started to set up what his sense of this exhaustion was. It was death everywhere. There was death everywhere. And as we cleared the field, we discovered that there was a suicide that seemed particularly powerful for him. So many of the deaths were leaving the fields to go to the good death. But there was one figure that wasn't leaving the field, and it was a suicide. And this was a suicide of someone who had a sense that doing suicide meant that you would not go to a good death, that you would not go to heaven. And so to any kind of heaven, to any kind of sense of a good death. So since that is such a Christian idea, we brought in a representative for the pre-Christian Europe for this person's ancestors, so that there could be a sense of holding and warmth and resilience and acknowledgement that came from something deeper than the prohibitions that arose with the church. And after that one was held for a little bit, and then they were able to move through to a good death, because it didn't have to be a good Christian death. And so that's an example of a way in which we're seeing both acknowledgement of like personal nervous system experience, and we're bringing in both ancestors within memory and ancestors beyond memory.
Are there other shares or questions for Sara about all this? And just wait until she brings in the hippocampus and and the right brain and the brain stem, and it just becomes brain parts fun. Other questions or shares? Part of what I love about this is, I know John Chaney, who does 5 elements Chinese constellations, and he sets up the 5 elements, or people who do chakra work and they do the chakras, or astrological ones and they bring in the signs. I've always thought that if constellations is essentially a technique to find out the unconscious of systems, then you kind of can constellate any system.
So true.
And so I love that you've done some, and it serves if you can combine an expertise that you have with the constellations. And Sara does have this neurological expertise. Yeah. The other thing that's always obvious to me, Sara, is that you're always having fun. At least most of the time you're having fun. Any other questions for, again, you have for faculty, including me, just questions that you have for any of us. Dyrian has mentioned that this book, The Love Trauma, is coming out. Does that stir? In fact, Dyrian, just go ahead and say a word about love trauma, and what it is you mean when you say that, and why we should all go out and buy the book.
Well, I think we all have heard a lot about trauma and how it affects us in our life. in everyday life, and how it keeps us from being who we are, really. And actually, the same thing is true with love, that during our early life, as in childhood, they're like developmental phases where we learn how to crawl and walk and think, all of that. And in the same way, our capacity for giving and receiving love, or different flavors of that capacity, is also developing. And so when a particularly strong trauma happens at one of these phases, it impacts our capacity with love to feel safe, to feel giving, to feel that I'm worthy of being given love, or, I mean, these different flavors, these different capacities, or thinking love is always work. I have to always work at it. It doesn't come to me. I'm not worthy without it. So those things are all related to the kind of trauma in childhood that impacted our love capacity.
So when we're working with love trauma, we're working with attachment issues, bonding issues, intimacy issues. And one of the things that we've been playing with a lot lately, it's kind of a takeoff on the interrupted reaching out movement that's very common and popular in family constellation work, is working with the interrupted merging movement, interrupted differentiating movement, interrupted autonomy movement. We work with true and false autonomy and spiritual autonomy, sovereignty. So we're really playing with it more in that, from that angle.
And especially expanding, like the interrupted reaching out movement, which practically everyone has heard about. But then for many of us, there's also difficulty letting go and separating, having more autonomy.
I think there are people on the call who don't even know what the interrupted reaching out movement might be. Maybe you could say just a few words about that for anyone who doesn't know.
Okay. Well, yeah. So one of the things that Bert Hellinger brought in, basically how there is an automatic reaching out impulse of any baby, any infant, and when that gets diminished or interrupted in some way, that'll, in a quite literal way, will keep me from opening my arms and my heart later on in life and in relationship. So it's that.
And it's important to watch in all constellations where there's an interrupted reaching out movement, and that you track through the body, through the breath, through the capacity to open and reach out.
Yeah, and we sometimes do even exercises in the constellation where you actually physically open or close, standing across from each other at optimal distance. So it's a quite physical and emotional fact of life.
I really appreciate that. Whenever I, have a client and they start to say, I can't seem to have a good job, and I can't have a partner either, and I don't have much money, and there are all these things they can't seem to have. My first thought often is I'm wondering if there's an interrupted reaching out movement, because that can be the concrete, day-to-day, very mundane impacts in adult lives of this kind of childhood trauma, and it, to one degree or another, I mean, we all have some of it, right?
Yeah,
of course, it's human.
Yeah,
it's natural.
Absolutely.
Good point, Leslie, though. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Sara, is there anything you want to add about the interrupted reaching out movements?
Oh, as you're describing it, what I'm realizing is this is where my journey began. Is with a healing of an interrupted reaching out movement. And everything began to come out of that.
Oh, it's so elementary, right?
I'm being really moved by the primary nature of this.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
And that's one of the dynamics that interrupts the flow of love. And our perspective on the constellation work is that it's really all about healing the ruptured, the interrupted flow of love in the family system or in the individual soul.
Oh, that's lovely. There are a couple of questions that are starting to come up. These are great. Right here in the last 15 minutes, of course, this is great. This is for you guys, Dyrian and JoAnne. I think it's perfect. Zane's really new to this, and so she's just asking, who's Bert Hellinger? Just say a word about who our founder is.
Yeah. Bert Hellinger is this wild and adventurous guy who has had a lot of background in psychology and spirituality, who came up with this. To me, it's always that he saw a door in a place where no one even knew that there was a building. He saw something of the relationships with people, with families, that could be made visual instead of just thinking about it.
Mm-hmm. Where he saw hidden dynamics in the family system, in the family soul, and that keep us in destructive patterns and interrupt the flow of love. Quite simply said.
He came up with this brilliant sort of doing this practice,
exactly,
called a constellation, that seems to have the ability to reveal, as I mentioned before, the unconscious of systems.
Yeah,
yes.
It makes the invisible visible.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We've all gotten very used to assuming that, we have an individual unconscious that gets expressed in dreams and other kinds of things. But as most organizational people will say, all groups have an unconscious as well. The main one we tend to focus on in this work is the family, cross-generationally. But as we've discovered with all of our faculty today, we can extend that beyond to other kinds of systems as well.
Yeah, and we also know now that the brain is a relational organ, not one just encased in our little head.
Right. Yeah, lovely. And then one other question we're going to squeeze in here. Since it was asked, and I'm wondering too, what's the interrupted merging movement? It sounds so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's the urge to merge.
Like Hubba Hubba?
It's a takeoff on the interrupted reaching out movement, but it's where we confuse our quality, our essential quality of merging essence with the divine, with the greater being, with the beloved, with God for some people, with the universe for others, with spirit, where that gets interrupted and we believe we only can merge with other. And the idea is that the deepest longing for merging is with the greater aspect, and is to connect with our own quality of merging essence that we all have inside, where we expand out into the field and this get filled with light, and the expansion has a dissolving quality of the ego.
Wow.
So the merging essence works with the merging with our locals, with our internal parts, with our loved ones, and then goes further into merging essence with the divine.
That's really interesting. Wow. And
a lot of that for us is influenced by and based on the Diamond Heart work, because we've been in this psychospiritual approach called the Diamond Heart work for 25 years. And that has really influenced our work. And we bring in a lot of the transpersonal concepts from that into the constellation work.
I really appreciate that. And I want to lift this up for those of the facilitators and budding facilitators who are working on building their practices. Probably everyone here who's a facilitator has another expertise or major interest.
Mm-hmm.
And often when I see people really thriving in constellation work, it's because they brought constellations with another interest or passion, or two, in Sarah's case, at least. So do be in connection with the other things that you know a lot about. It could be a really beautiful connection with the constellations work and make you unique in the constellation space. So,
Leslie, it's been my surprising delight and experience that pretty much everything I used to do separately before, at some point we realized we can actually blend it all and it enriches each other in the constellation work. That it's such a beautiful vehicle for expanding and taking in and making use of what I brought before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the
Integration,
somatic
more
psychology.
integration.
I'd love it if Sara would say something more also about the integration you've done, Sara, because it's so brilliant.
Oh,
And I'm going to invite you to do that for a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to share the intensive information with folks.
sure. I'll just do 1 minute of saying that I mean, I'm so deeply kind of in the interrupted merging movement, and so many things were coming to mind.
Oh, great.
I'm doing a U-turn here.
That's great. I love it.
We'll have time together.
Feel your body, come on back.
Just to say that my deep interest and understanding of the way that language connects us or separates us, and the way that language awakens the right hemisphere, which can be very unusual in our world. It's the left hemisphere is the hemisphere that carries speech. So in order to actually awaken the right hemisphere to words, we have to be quite clear and intentional about which words we're choosing. And there are elements of constellation work that allow right hemisphere language to really be the language that is kind of ruling that sphere, which is a deeply satisfying exploration and a part of what I'll be bringing to the conference, which is a beautiful segue to Leslie.
Yes, great, thanks.
Well, it also brings us full circle to Dyrian talking about how he connected with Bert around poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Poetry is that kind of right brain language. Often, not always, but often.
Yeah. Always.
Yeah, and song lyrics and chant.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you. And what, for those of you, again, who are facilitators, you know this jargon, the language of healing sentences.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that coming full circle. I'm going to grab everybody's screens for 1 second here. The magic of Zoom. Because I want to share with you just some information, which you're going to have a chance to write down if you would like to. I'm also going to send a follow-up email. The West Coast Systemic Constellations Intensive is where I have to say, this has been nice, not just for y'all, but nice for the faculty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
4 of us have gotten to play together in a way in this call that I think we haven't been able to be doing before. So I want to thank you for giving us the excuse, but we're going to get to play together for 4 whole days with all of you. May 30th to June 3rd here in California, USA. And the webinar special offer for you or anyone you refer. I know there's a lot of people on this call for whom next month in Northern California is just not an option, and we totally understand that. But maybe you know someone, you're like, holy cow, I know someone in San Francisco who ought to know about this. Or in Washington or in Arizona or somewhere in the United States where it might be easier. $50 off the shared bedroom or commuter regular registration through May 15th. So we want to offer that for anyone who's been on this call to encourage you to consider joining us. The shared bedroom registration includes the full program, 3 meals a day and 4 nights of lodging. The commuter registration is the same, it just doesn't have the lodging. Yeah. So you can find a lot more information about it at westcoastconstellations.com. And if you want to take me up on this offer, you're going to want to contact me, Leslie at conviviumconstellations.com, because it's for you guys. It's not for the public. So it's not on the website. So you're going to have to reach out to me directly in order to take advantage of this special. So that's all the information you need. Thank you for listening to that promotion for just a moment. Any questions about that anyone has, or happy to move back into just a couple more minutes If something you didn't get to ask JoAnne or Dyrian or Sara or me, this is a really good time to get it in or offer a share. Or if you're finding yourself like you just want to let us know your takeaway, something that was valuable for you that you're taking with you.
And I noticed that I missed one of the comments, which was from Miriam, who wrote that the left hemisphere piece was beautiful. It says, to be kind to my left hemisphere. What a concept. And then Shay or Shez said story. Shall we check
I also see Kimberly. I don't know if you've just joined us or you had a comment.
No, I just joined.
Okay, sorry to have you right here again, but we'll be sending out the recording. Shay, did you want to say more?
Storytelling. It says storytelling is right brain.
Oh, there you go.
Storytelling is right brain. Yeah.
And the left brain has to help put it into words.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Sheila.
Hi, this is Sheila.
Sheila.
Hey, Sara. And I really love that piece about how we're very familiar with the individual subconscious manifesting in dreams and images, and the idea of the sort of group consciousness being explored through constellations. And I'm wondering how else the group consciousness might show up.
Sheila, do you mean like, I mean, because when these folks started to talk about this, it occurred to me that there's organizational constellations where you're looking at the unconscious of a business. There's system constellations where you're looking at, for example, the movements of an ecosystem, of a particular ecosystem, and nature constellations. Leslie would be able to speak more about that. There's systemic explorations of huge political issues like North Korea and South Korea, something that's available that Stephen Hassner did on YouTube, or things about international migration or global climate change. All of these things have an unconscious that we move into when we move into constellation work with them. Did I understand your question at all, Sheila?
You're in the right neighborhood.
Do you want to ask a little bit more so that we...
Yeah. So what I heard was we have this concept of an individual unconscious or subconscious, and it shows up in ways. It shows up in dreams or images. It might come forth when we make art, or do something creative, right? And then there's this idea of the group having a similar this unconscious field, right? And we're tapping into that with constellations. And so the question that comes is, how else does that field manifest, right? If it's not in a dream or a vision or a piece of art of an individual.
Can I offer a bit of a response?
Yes, please.
If you've ever been in a business and the founder was an alcoholic, and 5 founders down the road, you're still hiring alcoholics despite everyone's good attempts to avoid that. There's something going on in the unconscious of the system that's maintaining that pattern. So when we're talking about people systems or larger systems, it's noting these kinds of patterns that are not limited to, the HR department deciding to do X, Y, or Z. And yet there's this thing that keeps happening.
Right.
Anyway, have you ever gone into a meeting and you were feeling just fine, but all of a sudden you got terrified and you blamed it on something? You thought, oh, I got terrified because of something. And then later on you found out actually the room had just gotten over a fight. Right? That's part of the systemics, the ways in which the unconscious of systems can show up in ways that are not just about what we're noticing consciously or take into account unconsciously. And as most people know, especially in organizational contexts, the unconscious of systems is actually running most of what's going on, often. Is that helpful, Sheila?
It is helpful, and it leaves me with a lot of curiosity around oh wow, how else might that show up, or how else might that be
Good.
explored? Leaves a lot of curiosity. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. And I know, Dyrian, you raised your hand for a second, and I want to acknowledge that, and then we can bring us to a close.
Oh, actually, I used to be a systemic group facilitator, and I think in everyday life we notice we walk into a room of a group and it'll have a feeling. We'll either like it or not. There'll be an atmosphere. There'll be a felt sense of each group. So it's really clear. There's always a group field present when there are a number of people present.
Yeah. And it is somewhat my regret that we don't have on the faculty someone who primarily does organizational constellations, but that's something to aspire to in the future, because they've contributed a great deal to the work as well, people who focus on organizational work. Mm-hmm. And with that, I am going to, however, acknowledge everybody. We have a few things here at the end we haven't specifically responded to, but thank you for all your chats and shares. Thank you for being here. I think for some of you, it may be sort of the middle of the night. And invite you to consider the intensive if it feels right to you. And reach out to the four of us if you're new to constellations, and find out more.
And come and play with us. It's always nice to be in a setting at an intensive with like-minded people and entering that kind of field, the relational field there. So it'll be a good time to be together and play together.
And for those of you who are from other parts of the world and the intensive is not possible, again, reach out to us or Google. Constellations are international. They're all over the world. I guarantee there's a facilitator somewhere in your nearest city, and invite you to jump on into the field. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, and thank you, Leslie, for putting this together.
Oh,
I'm going to unmute everybody, even though it's going to get noisy.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.